Yes, hello, ladies and gentlemen, to our second day of our workshop on identity and place and belonging. It's a workshop on citizenship, space, and community, a very important theme in particular today. My name is Ulrich Gehmann. I'm the director and founder of the Ideal Spaces Foundation. And I want to welcome the main moderator, Professor Jason Montgomery and Professor Ettore Mazzola. And it would be nice if you could make a short introduction of yourselves.
Good morning. So I'm Jason Montgomery. I'm a professor of urban design and also associate dean for graduate studies at Catholic University of America School of Architecture and Allied Arts. And I'm very pleased to be here joining the Ideal Spaces Foundation to help lead this discussion on place, identity, citizenship, and democracy. I'm also very happy to have Professor Mazzola, who is a professor of traditional urbanism, architecture, and building techniques at the University of Notre in the Rome program in Rome, Italy. So really excited to have this group and to have the audience joining us and to have a dialogue-focused event where instead of traditional papers, we have an active dialogue about these issues. We spent yesterday kind of laying what we think is a good foundation for today's conversation. Yesterday, we spoke about place, identity, citizenship, and democracy to some degree. And now what we're going to do is translate that conversation into a focus on community, democracy, space, and urban form. And we're part of the goal here is to really consider how the city as a place has potential to be vital for democratic life in the 21st century. And we're going to try to probe that today. But to lead us, to start our conversation today, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Mazzola.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you all for being with us. Yes, to introduce the subject of the discussion today, I would like to talk, I hope, try to be brief, try to talk about a very interesting story that is unfortunately not well known also in my own country, even if it's something that is, it happens a little bit more than 100 years ago at the beginning of the 20th century in Rome. You should know that after the unification of Italy, as it is happening in any place where there is the foundation of a new country, basically, or a colony, there is a massive movement of migration. And today we are experiencing a problem of migration. So this case has to be well known to solve, to understand how to solve this kind of problem. But the issue is not this, but is to understand how this model, which is probably the unique case of a real participatory program, which is another word that is extremely abused today, has been implemented to solve several problems. The development of Rome after the unification of Italy was a massive speculative program made by the Piedmontese, but obviously those that were following the Piedmontese. And it was a speculative intervention that destroyed also large part of Rome, because what we call disembowelment of the urban fabric is this program to bring in Rome some kind of urbanism and architecture that is more French than Italian, in a place where streets were narrow, were winding, and were various, instead of having something that was extremely rigidly organized with some plan that looks much more military than natural, as we can say. Something that was not welcome by the local people, especially those that were living in places that were destroyed. This destruction affected, obviously, the fabric where people were living, renting apartments, because we all love Rome, but we have to consider that 70% of Rome is fabric, is not monuments. And fabrics that is beautiful, is noble because of a corner condition, because of a portal, because of a cornice, because of a chimney, because of something that is giving nobility to simple fabric. So you have to imagine a city that used to be 165,000 of inhabitants concentrated in the Campus Martius, which in 60 years is becoming a city of 1.2 million of inhabitants. These are real numbers that must be taken in consideration to understand the very big lies that were made after the Second World War, where the urbanism of numbers and standard destroyed the planet, because it's not only a question of Italy or Germany, it's really the entire planet that was affected, especially the US, with a city that was designed for cars more than for humans. But in the case of Rome, as I reported in some of the books and essays I wrote, my passion of studying, analyzing brought me to archives. I studied all the laws, the tools that were valid on those days that we need to recover today to understand how to proceed instead of reinventing the wheel. Brought me to this story that was completely unexpected, and honestly, I never had any imagination that would have been something like that. Because when I was a student in the 80s of last century, it was absolutely normal to brainwash students, and unfortunately this is still happening today, convincing that these massive blocks that wrongly are defined as Soviet blocks for social housing, but in reality these are the consequences of Le Corbusier's theories and l'unité d'habitation. That was the only way to solve the problem of housing in a short amount of time with a low costs. And when I was making this analysis, I discovered the real bottom line cost of construction of many of the districts built in Rome at the beginning of the 20th century. And I didn't find only the real bottom line cost, but also the time that was needed for the construction, which was shocking. Because, for instance, if I take in consideration the development of San Saba, which is one of the most beautiful districts built in those days by Quadrio Pirani and unknown architects, I discovered that the first block, the first intervention around the Piazza Bernini was started in October 1908, and in 1909, the apartments were occupied, people were living there. Those buildings were built basically in 6 months, never restored in all these more than 100 years. And now built as a social housing, even if it was this idea of a social mix to facilitate the integration instead of segregating people. But this former social housing, a few years ago in 2020, one of these apartments was on an auction, and the cost per square meter was more than 11,000 euros. Because the quality is fantastic. We're talking about a building built with the bricks, where the architect said we need to avoid future cost of construction, and we can do cost of maintenance, and we can do that using durable material like bricks, tiles, etc. And indeed, that is what I discovered. So in this research, I discovered the history of the development of a district called Testaccio, called Testaccio because of testacium, is the brick, is the clay baked material, because that was the place where in ancient Roman time it was a large storage space, warehouse, Porticus Aemilia, and since all the amphorae that were transporting goods to Rome were transferred in a large jars in these warehouse, the amphorae used for the transportation were put to some place that was in the middle of nowhere on those days and crack. And all the pieces of the amphorae was put one up to the other, and in centuries grew up a mountain, a hill, Mons Testaccium, and still today, if you go there, you can see all these where they remove the ground. It's possible to see this layer. So it was a flat land nearby the Tiber, where after unification of Italy, it was thought that probably was the right place to make some industrial development. Part of the transformation of Rome with the Piedimontese was also involving, obviously, the region of Piazza del Popolo, which was a marvelous place. And outside of Piazza del Popolo, in those days, it was the slaughterhouse of Rome. But it was nearby the Tiber, so it was a very profitable place to make a development. So the slaughterhouse was demolished and transferred and built in a spectacular manner in Testaccio, probably the most important model for all around the world, made by the engineer Gioacchino Herzog. People were coming from all around the world to study this really exemplary kind of a slaughterhouse with the field for the cow, for the animals, to have 0 meters production. Obviously, those that were living nearby the slaughterhouse were forced to transfer themselves spontaneously to the new place because it was no system of transportation that was giving them any chance to survive. No retail, no grocery shop, nothing. So together, you have to imagine, together with this mass of people moving from all around, especially the south of Italy, that was the richer part of Italy before unification, that was transforming the third world of Italy to have a low-cost labor, immigrants moving to Rome, moving to Italy in general, because the industry were brought to Turin, Genoa, and Milan region. Rome was the place of white collars, so it was at a certain point decided also no longer to have any industry in Rome, but obviously the slaughterhouse was there. So since the city was growing without taking care about the working class, the quality of houses for the working class was based on the so-called enclosed block. So it was everything to maximize the profits, without taking care about the quality, but without an outer appearance of nobility. So the Beaux-Arts system was making buildings that were one block, one building, instead of having the variety of blocks made of many juxtaposed buildings. But those enclosed blocks were hiding horrible living conditions. Rooms without any ventilation. If you were lucky, it was a light well that was a dark well more than anything else. So the outer appearance of some pseudo-classical elevation with a French Piedmontese character was hiding these things, but nobody was thinking that. What was well known was the incredible amount of violence that was happening in this district, in the immense abuse of alcohol that was happening in this district, because the district was not provided with anything but a few taverne, where it was possible to buy some very cheap wine. You were bringing food there because they were not serving food, and you were taking this very cheap wine. But you have to imagine when you have these immigrants that are far from their family and are living there, what is happening still today in any kind of conditions like these of cities that are growing fast. There are the immigrants that are moving to the city looking for a better future. They rent an apartment. They don't have enough money to pay the monthly fee, and they sub-rent to another one that is probably sub-renting to another one that is sub-renting to another one. And at the end, what you have is that people that are living in this condition are reacting, are not accepting this treatment. There are people that are accepting and are, maybe complaining, but you need to arrive to the very extreme point to rebel, like what happened in 2005, starting from 2005 in the French banlieue, for instance. The same things and worse than banlieue was happening on those days in Rome. And on those days, they were obviously the liberal, more than all the others, were accusing the poor, the immigrants, to behave like that because they were deeply ignorant, and their attitude was to do like that. So the abuse of alcohol was because they were immigrants. Like today, exactly the same wise ideas. In reality, a group of sociologists, proto-sociologists, was trying to understand what was exactly happening in Rome as well as in Milan, as in Turin, the larger city. And in Rome, it was this figure which is totally unknown and needs to be rediscovered, that is called Domenico Orano, who was a proto-sociologist who had the courage to decide to live in Testaccio together with these people to understand what was wrong. This is the moment when philanthropy is growing in all around the world. And there are people that want really to understand what are the dynamics of the behavior of people instead of believing in the official version that they behave wrong because they are wrong. And obviously this guy, because he was making this kind of analysis, his picture was in all the police station, considered as a dangerous anarchist socialist. And in any case, what he did was to create the Committee for the Moral and Economic Improvement of the District Testaccio. A committee that was collecting together people from many different kind of social life, people that were ignorant, people well educated, people with a different religious belief, people with a different political belief, people completely different one each other, fighting one each other. But at the end, when it was necessary to think about the district, that they were acting as one. Orano documented apartment where up to 16 people were sharing a small room, and the average surface per inhabitant in Testaccio when Orano made this analysis was 1.75 square meter per person. Basically, they were living one up to the other. At the end, the only way to survive was because every morning they were waking up earlier in the morning to walk up to the place where they were building, because many of these immigrants were at the end the builders, were masons, carpenters. So the only thing they were doing was to get drunk and fell asleep. That's why, at the end, unfortunately, is a normal reaction. So this committee was extremely well organized because Orano was a proto-sociologist, as I said. But at a certain point in 1907 were the election for the new mayor. And this group of the Committee for the Moral Economic Improvement of Testaccio decided to go and vote as a block. It was called Blocco Popolare. And this mass of people that were forgotten people voted all for the same mayor, which was the first mayor that was not linked with the politicians, was not linked with the clergy, was not linked with the bankers, was not linked with anybody. It was simply a really representative of these people. So between 1907 and 1913, which was the period of his government, a lot of incredible things happened, and also because of the open-minded Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti, who was listening at these people, was listening at the needs, was listening at the great reconstruction, identification of the problems those people were thinking about. By the way, no one architect was involved. The architect was involved at the very last minute to understand how to proceed. And what they were refusing, these inhabitants, was also the idea of the grid, the plan, the city based on the grid, with no distinction, with nothing that was developing any sense of belonging, was refused. So they were suggesting to work with the little recess going up and down with the building. But obviously, it was also the collaboration with etiologists, because the etiology was developed on those days, understanding how the living condition can be the origin of epidemics. Economists were involved because also Luigi and Giovanni Montemartini were involved, and those that were the theoreticians of the municipalization of a series of infrastructure, and also the theorists of the cooperativism. At a certain point, because in 1911 it was planned to have the 50th anniversary of the unification of Italy, it was decided to make some transformation of the statue, which was considered a shame. And it was proposed to, because a lot of people, since the houses were not ready, a lot of immigrants were also living on the river embankment in temporary huts. And that was a big shame for Italy, for the capital of Italy, to show this horrible scenography to the visitors. So it was proposed to build quick houses, temporary houses, to hide the problem. But thanks to the committee, they said, we don't need to have a house, we need to have a future. We need to, we are not looking only for the house, we're looking for the labor. We need to have a social revenge. We would like to be part of the city. We refuse the charity because charity is something that is keeping people depending on those that are offering money, which was the trick used by the clergy and the nobility of Rome, that was giving something to these poor, and they were like a parasite. Those people say, we don't want to be considered parasite, we want to participate to the city. So thanks to the, let's say, joint venture among all these people like Orano, the two Montemartini, it was possible, and Nathan, the mayor, they said, okay, instead of building these blocks, the new blocks for these inhabitants with a private investor, because something I forgot to say is that after the unification of Italy, since the entire development of the city was made by private investors that were square-minded people thinking that the grid was the way, because obviously the grid was the easiest way to make a design. Even an ignorant can make a grid and build the buildings, especially if you want to build the enclosed block to maximize the profits. And to make this development, the immediately after the collapse of the Vatican States, a very smart Belgian cardinal, Francesco Saverio de Merode, made a theory, developed a tool, which is the mother of all the speculators, which was the called convention. Convention was an agreement between the municipality and the landlord. The landlord was allowed to design and build the building according to what was in his interests, and he was selling to the municipality the land necessary for building the streets. And obviously, they were building just streets, not spaces for gathering people because it was not profitable. And the value of land grew up to 10,000%. Basically, if you were a landlord on those days, you were a billionaire simply because of the value of land. And simply because of the stupidity of the public administrators that were buying the land at the value of area to build, even if they were simply making the streets. But the contract was also bringing the municipality to take care about the cost of construction of the streets, the pavement, the sewages, and any infrastructure. But because the municipality was not ready, was not prepared to do this, it was signing another contract with the same landlord that was building these things on behalf of the municipality, and he was also paid in advance. In a while, it was a bankruptcy of the Comune di Roma. The bankruptcy also because the costs were insane, because this grid was not considering the topography. If, I don't know, many of you know Rome, but on Via Nazionale, that was the first development from the Market of Trajan to the Baths of Diocletian, there is some dramatic topography which is completely hidden by this slab of Via Nazionale. And at a certain point, there is the Church of San Vitale next to the Palazzo dell'Esposizione, which is a sunken church. Nobody knows that church because it's under the ground. So the cost of infrastructure were insane. So it was this bankruptcy. And obviously the businessmen were having a lot of profit. This is the reason why when Nathan was elected the mayor and Orano and all these other thinkers proposed to have a different strategy, it was a great shift in Rome because they said if the business is building and the municipality has this deficit, the only way to cancel the debt is to become part of the business, which doesn't mean to be communist and say the state has to do everything, but is to say, okay, the state can participate to the business. It's not a crime. And probably this is also something, not probably, that is implementing something that is written in the Italian city code at the article La diligenza del mandatario, the right behavior of the administrator, where it's written that the public administrator has to behave as the good father of the family that gives the best example to his children. So at that point, if you have the state that can build buildings also for sale, it is possible to for the private investor to win the competition in real estate to do better than what the state does. And this is the reason why today there is no distinction between districts of working class, which was always mixed use, mixed function, mixed income, and those for the more wealthy people. But something more was made because we are also talking about the shape of the space. Thanks to the collaboration among all these experts, together with the committee, together with the women, this is incredible because we also have the women that are saying, okay, we need this, because they were really forgotten. On those days, they were living at home. So the apartments, instead of having the enclosed block, they developed a new typology of buildings that were the courtyard buildings. And they said, since the master plan forgot the space for gathering people, we will do the piazze inside the blocks. So they made a fantastic network through the courtyard. And every courtyard, in every project of every block into the courtyard, there is always something that is written, campo di gioco, the playground for children. The apartments were designed in a manner that were always receiving a cross ventilation for healthy reason. The apartment that until those days were organized with the enfilade system were now, so moving from one room to the other, introduced the presence of the corridor to separate the rooms and create a privacy inside the houses. All the kitchen were facing the courtyard in order to allow the mother to watch at the kids playing into the playground. And next to the playground were also places where elders were sitting to take care about the kids too. Traffic was not existing almost yet, but in any case, children were playing into the courtyard far from any risk. So the achievement of those days were incredible. But one of the greatest achievements was also the fact that thanks to this strategy of the state building houses also for sale, not for rent to people, they were doing something that was written in the document, in the laws I documented in my book, The Sustainable City is Possible, where I documented all these laws and tools valid on those days before the fascist time. It was written, if urbanism can facilitate the integration of social classes, the entire society will be in debt, which is absolutely true. The segregation is something that is crystallizing the problem. And thanks to this, they also solved the problem of the bankruptcy of the Comune di Roma, because something is to build the houses for a symbolic rent as a social housing. And something is to say, okay, I need 30 houses for social housing. I build, let's say 100, 70 are for sale, 30 are for social housing. I build also shops because these people need to have their own life. Mm-hmm. I sell all these things and I zero the cost of construction of social housing. And step by step, the Istituto per le Case Popolari became the most powerful motor of the economy of Rome, working in competition, in a healthy competition with the private investors. So the city of Rome was solving the problem of housing very, very quickly with some super high quality, super sustainable way, because the building were performing well in terms of thermoeconomy and were not consuming as it is happening with the light construction after Second World War. But what was also great, it was that because the state was building in competition with the private investor and was giving the guideline for some quality, for some aesthetic, believing or not, there are articles, laws on those days that are talking about the importance of the eurythmia in construction, which looks insane today. The city was giving houses, and it was also producing local economy, because it was no longer the entrepreneur coming from the north of Italy or from abroad, making the business like in the movie of Woody Allen, take the money and run, and not leaving anything, but everything was developing the local economy, in some way responding to what was conceived by the Committee for the Moral and Economic Improvement of Testaccio, where those people were saying, we don't want your charity, we want to have a future.
No.
Because later on, all those people were the builders and the consumer of the houses, because obviously they were going to live there, and then they were building even in other places of Rome. Unfortunately, this was valid until 1925, when during the fascist regime, it was decided to wipe out all these wise law and tools, and go back to the status of the state that is just managing things that are built by private investor. So if someone is asking why of the ugliness of Rome post-World War, it's simply because at a certain point it was decided to go back to some policy that is giving too much power to people that not always deserves that trust. Because at the end, a developer probably doesn't have any interest in quality of buildings. They are just thinking at the boxes. And it's not a case if today, if you want to buy an apartment, or if you want to go to an hotel, what they sell you is not the interior, but is the view from your house. The developers today are working into historical centers because they know that in terms of real estate, selling an apartment that has a special views has a value, but they never take in consideration the opposite view. The model of Testaccio, the model of all these laws and tools I documented in this book, The Sustainable City is Possible, are those I use for many of my projects of urban regeneration, and I reported also in the book Urban Regeneration, but are also those I do with my students, but are also those that I discover these tools, these laws I mentioned that were valid in Rome. I discover that were similarly made today in the Netherlands, in Brandenburg. When I work with my students in Brandenburg, I discovered that the same idea of mixed income was seriously taken in consideration, as well as in the magical recent estate that has been done in Paris, in Le Plessis-Robinson, where a monster district, a monster banlieue starting from 1919 has been replaced with a marvelous district where 43% of the houses are social. Nobody knows who are those, which are these houses. And it's a perfect example of a social mix and mix of functions.
I think this example, if you take the Testaccio example as paradigmatic as regards its approach, its general approach. The question is, when we look at one of our topics for today, how is space related to the concept of community? The question is, how can models like Testaccio on its variants, the Plessis Robinsons, and comparable approaches, no? Following this paradigm of a Testaccio development, how they can be multiplied in today's Western conditions. Also when we look at Western large urban agglomeration, plus when we look with an eye on democracy, when we look at increasing social disequalities rising in the last 10 years, and the accompanying rise of right-wing and populist movements. Also when we all want to avoid this, it's an assumption for the sake of democracy. Democracy needs mixed housing. Also the social justice. Genau. It's about social justice in the end. How to achieve this in recent conditions, let's say more frequently, also on a larger scale, to serve as an example, and with more frequent Robinson and Testaccio-like models, this is an argument.
This is an argument, but it's something that is definitely possible to be done. Yeah. Because at the end, something is to go forward like we used to, especially in the 60s, when the worst theory of urbanism have been developed following the Athens Charter imposed by Le Corbusier. And something is to emulate models that are well tested by time, like Testaccio. Because we are not talking about, I'm not the guru that is coming here and I say, I have the verb and you have to do what I do, like Le Corbusier. Is simply doing what any advanced society, according to Edmund Burke, said, has to do, watching behind to see if there is some model that has been proved is working and that we can rediscover simply because we put in a drawer and we forgot, because we were dreaming about some hypothetical modernism of future, which has been proved was completely a failure. The drastic decision taken in the 30s, basically, of last century, to say, okay, let's scratch from zero. We don't need to see the past is the past. We need to think about the future. That was crazy because in the past we had, for those historicists, modern historians that are believing that there are periods, there is the Middle Ages, then the Middle Ages is put in a drawer, locked, and then there is the Renaissance, and then there is the Baroque, and then there is the Neoclassicism, which is completely wrong because every period was overlapped. No one woke up one morning and say, okay, today I will invent the Baroque. No. It was a natural passage from one space to the other. And tradition is growing together with the needs, and it is growing, analyzing critically the results and say, okay, this works, let's keep it. This doesn't work, let's change it. But deciding at a certain point, only because of ideology, that everything that was the past was belonging to the past and we have to watch forward, brought to the collapse of the society we're experiencing now. Because it's not only an environmental collapse, it's a collapse that is involving any aspect of our life.
So let me ask a question that I think keeps this conversation going, which is yesterday we spent time probing the idea of, or the conception of, whether human nature is profoundly changing over time to our current moment, and therefore we need to adjust, or there are constants. We keep running into the constants that are leading us to, give us perspective, allow us to pull previous examples forward in time to understand. The idea of community is a similar good question. Like, how do we think we can define community today? It's a word that's thrown around, like human nature is thrown around as a term. And it's, in the context of the United States, any new housing development of any shape or size is automatically given the term community. But we know that's not necessarily the case, because there are certain characteristics that we can probably say make a community, and there are certain characteristics that might not allow communities to form. And so I think if we want to understand Testaccio's power, if we want to understand the power of the thinking of that moment, and pull forward so that we can apply into the 21st century, and we're thinking about social justice, we're thinking about democratic, values at the core of this. If you want to have a democratic society, and the idea of community is important to democratic society, how do we define community? What are the critical characteristics?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
An important point. Okay. Yeah, how we define community. Let me go back to etymology. A famous 19th century architect said, I think it was Xingtu, architecture without etymology is not understandable. And a community as a communitas is a grouping of people where there are relatively close relations between the members. Second, where there exists on a personal basis mutual trust, respect, and all this will generate a feeling of belonging. A related term we addressed yesterday with the citizen, the civis, and the civitas. Civitas is a more formal issue. So civitas, it's Roman thinking. So civitas is a formal belonging that I am a member of a formal community, but civitas is no communitas. So if you want to have a real community, we need this minimum. So we need these characteristics addressed above. The second point is a community has to develop over time. A community has to evolve. I cannot command a community. This has been the utopian mistake in classical utopias. A civitas can be established more or less right now. Also, per law. Also, we define some rules. We have some formats according to which a citizen belongs to a civitas. This we can make today and tomorrow afternoon, and then we have it, also more or less. A community grow, and you must evolve. And if culture needs time and place to unfold, and if culture is in large if these are assumptions. If culture is in large parts based on communities and so-called intentional groupings of people, then it needs time until a community evolves. And the question for architecture and making space is then, like the Testaccio example, is architecture able to provide a kind of frame of a built environment with some frame conditions, also frame conditions in this civitas manner, setting the stage and the frame where a community can develop, or communities can develop inside the frame.
Yeah, it's as I said, it was the specific article of the rules that were regulating the development of Rome on those days that says if urbanism can facilitate the integration of social classes, the entire society will be in debt.
Yeah.
Because you have to create a just society which is the community, where independently from the income, independently from the culture, with the mutual respect, with the mutual trust, with the mutual interests, which is, in this case, the community is the quality of the district, the quality of the place, you, as a Orano well documented, you will act as one. Because he said, he is very interesting to read the books, because he wrote 5 books in 5 years that were called, how in Italian is Come dove vive il popolo a Roma, how and where live the people in Rome. He was documenting the living condition, but he was documenting also the way those people were participating to the meeting of the committee. They would say it is interesting to see people that are, they can kill one each other for other reasons, for other beliefs, for other ideas. When we talk about the community, about the district, they forget any antagonism and they behave as one. This is something amazing, because we are not talking about utopia, we are not talking about theories, but we are talking about a great example of what the sociologists are calling participatory program, or a participated experience, because he's simply reporting the real data, he's not reporting his ideas. And the data says that these people are behaving like this. And if 100 years ago, when the situation was terrible, guess that the Pope visited the statue and he was kicked out throwing stone against his group. The violence it was really a scaring place. And if a scaring place was transformed in a manner, and I'm sorry because I really forgot to say probably the most important thing of this experience, because as I told you, it was this violence. People were raping buildings and people because obviously they were refusing to live in this condition. And the private owners of the apartment where people were living were ignoring the problem that those people were damaging the buildings, were damaging the properties, because that was a trick to rise up the monthly fee. They were ignoring the sub-renting because that was a trick to rise up so it was this business on the desperation of people. But when Giulio Magni translated in architecture and urbanism the ideas of the committee, and later on Quadrio Pirani completed the work even in a more beautiful way, because even the economy of the Istituto changes, so it was possible to invest more money for more durable and beautiful materials and decoration. The director of the Istituto Case Popolari said that it might seem weird to talk about beauty when we are talking about public housing. But you see, it's undeniable that tenants are keeping the buildings in a better manner, in a more respectful manner. Even the very poor person coming from the countryside has a completely different attitude. And this means that the building is performing an educational role. And so they invented the slogan that sometimes is written, because they were also making decoration on the building with the inscriptions. And one is La Casa Sana ed Educatrice, the healthy and educational home, because they understood how the sense of decorum and also the decoration of a building in a social housing was developing the sense of belonging, was giving identity. One of the things people were refusing in the earlier testaccio before this committee was the monotony, this idea that was preceding the communist idea of making something that was making everybody the same, flattening the planet, while those people were looking for unity without the uniformity. With the variation of the type, having something that at the end belonged to one project, but is differentiated to a differentiated personality, because we are different, so why we need to have the same aspect? Later on, this research went even forward, because when the Garbatella district was made, they also understood how important was to listen at the very different category of people. When it was decided, let's try to make the garden city, it was analyzed, the model of the garden city by Gustavo Giovannoni, and it was realized that despite some house could be beautiful, the repetition of the same model for kilometers doesn't work, because it's negating any personality, any individualism, but also is not taking in consideration the different needs of different kind of families. But having the apartment over 2 floors, where you can have some disability, it's a limitation, because in a single family house, you cannot have the elevator, because if the elevator is blocked, you can, on those days, obviously, they were not thinking about these things, but ladies were involved in the discussion, say, what is the kind of house where you can live? They were thinking about even the dispersion of heating in winter in apartment on more than 1 story. But they were also considering families with many children, family with no children, family of elder, family with disability, family with the time possible to be invested to take care about the garden, and people that were absolutely uninterested in having the garden. That's why the Italian garden city, Garbatella, Città Giardino Niene, are like normal cities where you also have a greenery, but everything is designed according to the incredible variety of human being you can have. When you do the same for everybody, you are destroying the aspect of individualism, which has to be preserved, because something is to consider the importance of the entire community, and something is to limit the freedom of someone to have his own habits in the respect of the other.
I think it's a central point we addressed it already yesterday. It's a central point for both civitas and communitas. No? It's a matter of respect and diversity is the issue. When people are diverse, I have to respect their diversity, and this is not identical, in my eyes at least, with today's woke ideology or this postmodernist anything goes. That's a different issue. You know?
Right.
Respect and diversity is not anything goes.
Right. Yeah.
And diversity and respect is a premise for having a dialogue with these other people I'm confronted with, no matter how this dialogue will run. And I think an important point of the dialogue is also to accept and to let stand that the other I'm speaking with will not change his opinion after I spoke with him. His point of view and I have my point of view, but nonetheless, we are speaking with each other in an open way. Translated to recent problems of community and to the pseudo-public space of social media we addressed yesterday. What do you think? How this paradigmatic testaccio approach could be realized on a larger scale in Western cities?
I think it is definitely the model, because it's well tested, as I said, and it's something that is urgent, because we always forget that there is an agenda that has been decided with the COP 25, 26, 27, 28, and the last one was 29. This agenda is, in some way, we can say, okay, it's there. On another hand, we can say that probably this has been manipulated, because many of these things are decided for the industry of construction to promote intervention to sell the materials they are producing that are claiming to be clean or being green. The agenda in Italy, it has been also interpreted as an attack on private properties, because differently from what is happening in the US, which honestly I disagree,
Yes.
is limiting the private property, because a condo generally is owned by a person that is renting the apartment, while in Italy, the private property is widespread. In a condo, every apartment belongs to the owner of the apartment. And then there is the community, which is the condominio, which is a place where there are debates when it's necessary to make a restoration, etc. But with the agenda of COP 26, 25, 27, and I think this is affecting the entire Europe more, because in the US, these things are not the life file is not negotiable, as Bush said, unfortunately. But the problem of this is because they said that independently from the taxes we are paying for owning our apartments, if we don't make the project to improve the efficiency of the building, the apartment will be out of real estate, either both for selling or for renting, which means that our apartments are going to value zero, and then it will be some investor coming from we don't know where that is going to buy everything to make the building efficient. And he's going to buy for zero because in terms of real estate, the value will be ridiculous. This is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy that is completely unknown. When I'm talking with people and I'm asking if they know what this agenda considered, in 2035 is not that far, depends on the class that has been decided with a ridiculous calculation that is simply considering the thermal behavior without considering the hygronomic behavior. So a lot of buildings that are being coated recently with these ridiculous chemical and dangerous materials are now suffering because of the condensation inside the apartment, because the hygrometry was not taken in consideration. And when you have a condensation into the apartment, you can have asthma. So there are a lot of problems that are completely undervalued. And now there is the very serious problem of the properties. And if we need to make this, instead of making another code to the apartment and to destroy historical building, because on historical buildings, you can't put that. Building with a decoration, it's impossible to be transformed in that manner. Now there are special mortars that are using microcells, nanotechnologies, which are presented as something very, very green, with crazy costs, with durability, which is completely unknown because it's a new material. Even the Eternit, I don't know if you're using the same name, but it's the cement asbestos, was presented as something fantastic. And then we discovered that it was killing people. So all these idea of reinventing the wheel has a lot of side effects, while we are ignoring something that has to be taken in consideration. I'm sorry if I'm going all around, but I think it's impossible not to underline that one of the worst things that has been theorized in the 20th century is this stupidity of the falsification of history. At a certain point, and we have a law made during the fascist time in 1938 that says, starting from now, it's strictly forbidden to build in a style that is not the current one to avoid the double falsification of the older current history of architecture, which was a way to wipe out any kind of classical traditional architecture. Even if today, if you make some classical traditional building, you're accused to be fascist. So this is something that in this moment require not the efficiency of historical building, but needs to be done on the buildings that are documented by the European Environmental Agency as those buildings that are the more hungry in terms of energies, which are all the buildings built after Second World War. Mm-hmm. So if we want to reduce the carbon emission, we don't have to produce with an immense carbon emission temporary materials that are going to be replaced to emulate the behavior of a building built with the traditional materials that doesn't need any kind of treatment. But we need to wipe out all the wrong buildings in a kind of Marshall Plan and step by step replace this building with a more durable material, more efficient material, with 0 kilometers energy, 0 kilometers architecture, 0 kilometers in any kind of aspect. So in the spirit of this, and considering the immense amounts of funds that have been decided after the COVID to relaunch the economies all around the world, instead of investing this money in ridiculous project in Italy, for instance, I would like to mention the ridiculous idea of having the bridge between Calabria and Sicily, which is a bridge that doesn't take in consideration the fact that geologically, Sicily is moving 7 millimeters a year, because there is the crack, there is the falda in between. So you need to have a rubber bridge. So we are spending billions for nothing, while these monies could be invested to make a project like the one that was made when it was really necessary to provide the houses for those people, for the immigrants and those evicted from the center of Rome, which is, instead of bringing the money only in one project like the Bridge of Messina, is widespread all around in Italy, is widespread all around in Europe, is widespread all around in the world. Because if we really care about the planet, if we really care about the carbon emission, we need to understand that we don't need, as I wrote in one of my essays, we don't need to create new energies to maintain the lifestyle, but probably we have to change the lifestyle. We need to build with a building that are less consuming instead of maintaining the same consumption with the new technologies that probably are not those that are going to solve the problem of the planet.
Thank you very much for your image to show that. The statue, especially, that was very inspiring. And for me, one of the main questions would be then, if we today take some existing, let's say, social housing, or not in the end, middle or upper class housing estates or areas, what would be the key element to bring back social diversity to these areas? Because what we find today is already that we got the groups who can get away from these areas already have gotten away. So what is it to bring it back? And I learned from what you told us that one key factor is that it's private ownership of condos, of flats, of housing. And the other one would be that the outer aspect in the end, or at least the outer aspect of that buildings, should be more or less the same, so that you cannot say that's the house where the rich person lives, that's the house where the poor person lives. But in West, it's a more storage house, and they're all mixed up, blurred up, maybe someone with the roof terrace and some other thing like that you do not see from the outside. Just to give that social structure, an internal building, an architectural structure, and as well to have then these, well, let's say, public places, meeting places, from playground to, well, just a sitting bench for the elderly, to give a new concept on that. And I believe there are some examples in this field that could be quite close to the thinking of the statue. We did something comparable in the world, Ulrich probably knows, where we had a district that was called South Street, Keltenstraße, which was quite interesting because it had a very low social structure, very low income. It wasn't any effort taken into the surroundings and design of how the housing fit together and places and streets and ways, halfways. So what in the recent year happened was to bring in additional housing, which was an idea which was severely discussed at first, because bringing more housing was perceived as bringing in more social problems. In the end, it wasn't, because what was brought in was private flats, condos, which were owned by private people, mixing up the structure and at the same time renovating all the existing buildings in exactly the same style the new built buildings had. And so today, you can hardly see the difference whether the building is an old one or is a new one. And so that really worked. That gave a rise to that area. And I guess that could be a kind of comparison for the statue in a, let's say, in a very small scale today's appearance.
Obviously, it is definitely agreeable. As a provocative project, after publishing my book, The Sustainable City is Possible, where I documented those laws, those tools valid on those days, I received some suggestion, some provocation from some colleagues. Say, yes, these are ideas, these are theories, these are numbers, these are laws, but what we can do today, is it doable or not? And how you can work where you have a social disaster. So as a provocation, I decided to make a proposal to, at the end, to do what the inhabitants were asking to do since 2001. In Rome, we have a building, which is called Corviale, which is a crazy project. Is a 1 kilometer building, 9 stories. The genius who designed the building decided that the shops were at the 4th floor because it's a balcony building. So you have a corridors like a balcony that is serving the apartments where the ventilation is terrible. And officially there are 6,500 inhabitants there. There are no functions at all. It's surrounded by large voids. Spaces, because this is another thing I will go back on this, and if I forgot, please remind me this. I propose, instead of making any kind of renovation on a building that is really performing horribly, a building that it is documented that took 7.5 years to have the first 122 apartments inhabited, differently from those of San Saba in 6 months, whose cost of maintenance after 1982, when it was finished, was up to 2010 was roughly 50 millions of euros of maintenance cost. Crazy. The idea was to replace this with a district that was inspired by Carpatella, because that was the request of the inhabitants. And I shown that simply working in the voids, because you have also to consider what could be the strategy to move inhabitants from a block where they live in a place where, despite of the quality of the place, they develop some social relationship. You can disrupt the life of those people. But if you build, if this is the building and here I have a void and I build next to that building a new building with a characteristic I'm suggesting, when this will be ready, those people could be moved and I can demolish that. And step by step, I can have a completely different urban form, keeping the same inhabitants and bringing new inhabitants, because I have to balance this cost, because I have to return these houses to those people without causing any problem. And I demonstrated that bringing all the functions that are not existing there, bringing all the shops, bringing 5 piazza in a place where there is no space for gathering people, and bringing 2,000 inhabitants more. And this means that increasing the cubic meters, but in terms of surface, I'm returning to countryside 13 hectares to be used as a park, to have the right amount of green. Instead of adding public costs, I estimated in 2010 when I made this project, a profit of 580 millions of euros possible to be invested in another place. So again, it's not an invention. I'm not the guru. I'm simply showing if we are humble enough to take in consideration laws and tools we used to have 100 years ago, and we reuse it, because this year is the 100th anniversary of the cancellation of these laws, we can really do something that is special, and is something that is a model, is a socio-economical urban model that is valid all around the world, where, in my opinion, according to what were the requests of the inhabitants, what were the requests of the inhabitants of the statue 100 years ago, what is necessary to add is a kind of architecture, a kind of urban form that is respectful of places, in order to do the most important job of a designer, which must be the design of the sense of belonging, the reinforcement of the identity of places. Because having the same language all around the world is completely cutting the roots of places. This doesn't mean to be nationalist. This simply means to respect tradition, to respect places. And I would like to remind one more time what I already said yesterday. If at a certain point of the civil war in ancient Roman time were stopped by Augustus with the Pax Augustea, was because Augustus was the right person who decided to respect all the tradition, all the religions, and host in Rome the other religion in a perfect world where you really can have some mutual respect. So architecture, urbanism needs to respect the places because the buildings, cities have been developed according to their local needs. And if we need to build the buildings that are respectful of the planet, we need to return to a kind of buildings that is using local material, is reducing as much as possible the transportation. Because if we really want to do something that could be recognized as a sustainable, instead of focusing, as unfortunately 100% of what is advertised, it does, which means that the energy cost in face of exercise of the building, if we respect the whole life cycle from the extraction from the quarry to the transformation of the place that is going to transform the material, to the transportation of the site of construction, to the site of construction, to the usage of the building, to the demolition of the building, to the transportation of the dump, that is the entire life cycle of the material. The only way to do buildings that are not consuming and are respectable is to do what our wise ancestor was to do. Use what your country, what your place offers. If I have a clay, I can do bricks. If I don't have, and I have a wood, I will use wood. If I have a stone, I will use stone. I have to do something that is reducing as much as possible all the indirect costs of energy that are necessary for the building process.
Like even the area we sit in, we look at the building materials, we look at the roof forms, we look at the roof finishes. All of those are long-term responses to the rainfall that you get in this region, to the snowfall, to the temperature swings, to the materials that are nearby, and that's where a region gets its character. So is an intelligent response to all those things, which is the opposite of thinking that there's one solution that you just apply broadly. It's very interesting. So stratification is what we might say like stratified populations that you're bringing up, which are often self-stratifying, or the people with means pull themselves out of diverse communities so that they feel like they can be in a place they want. And that tends to then gravitate towards self-selection and monocultures, right? In terms of economic, social, racial, even sometimes. And obviously racial in the United States was even codified in law, where there were covenants when people were deciding, hey, cities are dirty and polluted and so forth, and we need to move out of the city. In the United States, that was happening when suburbanization was first instigated and the car was facilitating that. Literally, so-called communities were developing, but they had covenants where you were not allowed to sell to somebody with dark skin in the legal agreement. So it was literally stratifying, and it wasn't giving a certain population any choice in the matter.